Lewd, crude, but legal is, of course, all about pornography and the law. Like it or not, the country is wallowing in a sexual revolution. Hardcore pornography is everywhere, not just in the so-called combat zones of the nation's big cities. Some would say we're drowning in a sea of garbage. Others say we're being liberated. And yet others say if you don't like pornography, don't pay attention to it, that the pornographers have their rights to publish just like everyone else. Well, given the amount of stuff that's on the market everywhere, it would seem that pornography is here to stay. But a number of communities are saying enough is enough, and they're using the courts to find out if pornography is legal in the first place. And so the argument goes on. Before it's over, a lot of people might wind up in jail. This man, for one, could face 25 years in jail. He is Larry Flynt, publisher of Hustler magazine. Larry Flynt's Hustler is probably the most uncompromising porno magazine yet, enough to make even Hugh Hefner, father of Playboy, wince.
Only two types of people really oppose pornography. People that either don't know what they're talking about or the ones who don't know what they're missing.
We'll also meet this man, Larry Parrish, Assistant U.S. Attorney of Memphis, Tennessee. He says the war against obscenity is not lost if prosecutors will use the law.
I think that it could be eliminated from the market in a relatively short period of time. And the indications that I see now, I see public officials, leaders, legislators, prosecutors who are determined to do something about it, and I think they can.
Larry Parrish has prosecuted dozens of people successfully. Among them, this man, the first actor ever convicted by a jury on a federal obscenity charge. He is Herbert Stryker, better known as Harry Reams. Reams made his mark in Deep Throat, the film that made pornography trendy. The phrase Deep Throat subsequently moved into the language, the code word for the chief informant in the Watergate scandal. For Harry Reams, Deep Throat was an afternoon's job. He performed for one day, got paid $100, and 4 years later, after the Supreme Court changed its definition of obscenity, Reams was convicted of conspiracy to transport obscene materials. In Reams' case, conspiracy simply meant he was in the movie. The movie went on to make $25 million in profit and is still going strong. Reams has gone bankrupt paying his legal fees. He's taken his appeal everywhere, including the Harvard Law School.
Obviously, the conspiracy laws are rather dangerous in that they can implicate practically anyone, regardless of how peripherally connected they are to some activity that is later found obscene. We're dealing with a very vague law, conspiracy. Compound that with the obscenity statutes, and you've got total mayhem in the courtrooms. That's what took place in Memphis. You're dealing with laws that have no definition. How are we to define what is obscene? Someone may find Ulysses obscene and Deep Throat not. Others may find Deep Throat obscene and Ulysses not. To quote William O. Douglas, obscenity is delineable only as a sin, and as a sin is in the minds of some and not in others. It is totally too subjective for legal sanction. It must remain in the dreams of man.
Reams has also drawn support among the actors, writers, directors, and critics of Hollywood and New York. Professionals in the arts may not find Deep Throat as such a piece of art worth defending, but they are worried about the threat of being arrested later on for what they write or act in today. Head of the Screen Actors Guild, Kathleen Nolan.
I don't know that anyone needs to know how I feel about pornography or do not feel about pornography. I think that's my private decision, which should be the private decision of every human being in the United States, to be their own censor, to be their own judge. I don't think that anyone need to be that judge for us.
Actor Eli Wallach.
I made a movie 20-some-odd years ago called Baby Doll, which was condemned by the church. Cardinal Spellman put out an edict against it. If that film was seen today, 20 years later, you'd say, what a mild little movie by Tennessee Williams, a sweet story of the South. What happened with Harry is he's being punished. He's just a little ant in the whole picture.
If Harry Reams is just a little ant on Pornography Hill, then Larry Flynt, who merchandises Hustler and sex dolls, is the king of the hill.
Good.
Pornographers, just like everyone else, are attracted to the good life. So down where the South Atlantic laps at the shores of Palm Beach is where the Hustler photographic gang hangs out. What they sell is a dream of extraordinarily accessible women. It's perhaps the oldest game in the world. Filthy French postcards raised to a major industry. And this is the Dream Factory, a Spanish-style stucco mansion where Hustler turns out more close-ups of human genitals than are to be found in any medical textbook.
Okay, now cover yourself with your
And it's all worth a fortune. The big three magazines have a circulation easily surpassing 20 million customers a month. And if you multiply the number of people buying by the number reading, you could wind up with half the population. Their income is anywhere from $500 million on up. Their business is rude, nude, and lewd. Although the so-called classier magazines will give themselves an air of respectability by interviewing a presidential candidate here and publishing a famous author there. But their real business is right here, between the neck and the knees of women and only occasionally men. And these are the editorial offices of Hustler magazine in Columbus, Ohio, of all places. Sodom, Gomorrah, and whatever else you can imagine in the very middle of Midwestern Middle America. And if the people who work here ever had any qualms about the stuff they sell, those qualms have long since been washed away through familiarity with the product.
I feel that there's so many around now that I don't consider it pornographic anymore.
I have 3 grown children, and they're all over 21, and they've seen Hustler, and it doesn't bother me at all. They're quite old enough to know what their own morals are going to be, and the magazine isn't going to influence them.
But questions of morality and taste really are not the main concerns of Hustler. It is a business enterprise like any other. Larry Flint, who founded the magazine, says he has a monthly circulation of 3 million, and he started another sex magazine called Chic. It seems to be a rule of the porn business that the publisher must live in a mansion, and indeed Larry Flint does. In his Tudor-style house that sits solidly in a posh and conservative suburb of Columbus. Flint paid $400,000 for it and another $600,000 to refurbish it. It has 23 rooms, a swimming pool, a wine cellar, all the necessities of life that a Kentucky farm boy insists upon when he makes good. Flint tells us that it took the neighbors a little more time than usual to get used to the business of Mr. and Mrs. Flint. His fourth wife, Althea Leisure Flint, is executive editor of Hustler, and his brother Jimmy handles the business end.
You'll have an answer.
They all boast that they're a bunch of hillbillies who struck it rich in publishing the magazine that nobody quotes. But they've all been charged with conspiracy to pander smut, and if convicted, they could each face 25 years in prison.
Hustler is nothing more than a mirror that reflects the private fantasies of the individual readers. What we tend to forget is that the newsstand is the poor man's art museum. The rich and the privileged have the erotic art museums. And Hustler really appeals to blue-collar America. It's as commonplace in America as apple pie.
You say that, and you make a very convincing case, but in fact, aren't you really just trying to put a gloss on what is a very tacky business?
Not necessarily. Look, Moses freed the Jews, Lincoln freed the slaves. And Larry Flint with Hustler magazine would like to free a lot of neurotics. Besides, I think a copy of Hustler magazine is a lot cheaper than a psychoanalyst anyway.
You really believe that?
I believe it.
I mean, it's not the justification of a rich man for what he does.
Not really, because I think the sooner we bring pornography out in the open, the sooner people are going to see it for what it really is, and there's nothing more boring. And repression just makes it popular.
And Larry Flint, a rich fellow.
Well, now, if you were talking to the publisher of the New York Times, you wouldn't necessarily be talking about how much money he makes or how rich he is.
In this debate going on right now, obscenity in the law, what's obscene, what's not obscene, a lot of people feel caught in the middle because, well, on the one hand, they're appalled by pornography. They do believe in freedom of speech, freedom to publish, and they don't want to come to the aid of a Larry Flynt.
I understand this perfectly well, but there's no such thing as being a little bit pregnant. And let's face it, a lot of the individual liberties that we gained by the very liberal Warren Court have been placed in jeopardy by the conservative Supreme Court that we now have. Their recent rulings involving the First Amendment have literally sown dragon's teeth in the fertile soil of the First Amendment. And we have to do something about it. Freedom is not always recognizable. It's not just limited to 60 Minutes or the New York Times. It also means Hustler magazine or an X-rated movie playing in a nice neighborhood. But a few years back, it was some young boys saying, "Hell no, I won't go." And then it was some hard-ass riding down Main Street saying, "Love it or leave it." And the sad thing about it is, if this freedom don't exist for some of us today, it may not exist for any of us tomorrow. And it's beyond me to understand that how a country founded on the printed word, at its 200th birthday, that people can still be questioning what kind of book that you can read or what kind of movie that you can see. When the government interferes in this, they're interfering with our thought process. No one has a right to do that. And if I have to go to jail to prove my point, I will do just that.
And the juries have been gathering around the country. There are laws against obscenity, and those who fought for them have been heartened by the success of this man, Assistant U.S. Attorney Larry Parrish of Memphis, Tennessee. It was Parrish, you may remember, who secured the conviction of actor Harry Reams in the Deep Throat case. But an awful lot of people came to Harry Reams or Stryker's defense, not because they want pornography, but because they do fear censorship.
You can express whatever ideas you want. You can advocate whatever ideas you want. The only thing the law does is it has some restriction on the modes that you can use to advocate those ideas. You can't advocate nudity by walking down the street naked here.
How do you get off deciding what's obscene?
I don't get off deciding what's obscene at all. It's juries that decide what's obscene and what is not obscene. If the material is patently offensive, which is a totally objective standard, I think prosecutors have an obligation to present that material to a grand jury, for a grand jury to make society's determination as to whether it appeals to a prurient interest and whether it has serious value. Now, what is patently offensive is simply a matter of having two eyes and to be able to see. The Supreme Court has said that patently offensive conduct, using that as a legal term of art, is ultimate sex act, it is masturbation, it's excretion, it's lewd exhibition of the genitals. And no matter how much it might personally offend any given individual, unless those things are depicted, it is not patently offensive.
What's the difference between what they're doing in Deep Throat and what these folks are doing in these magazines, which incidentally we bought right here in Memphis? Hustler, International, Club, High Society, Playboy, Gallery, Genesis, Playboy again, Playgirl, We, Penthouse, and more. On goes the list. What's the difference?
In Tennessee, the state law is a very poor law. The state laws generally are poorly drafted laws, and they have built into them misconceptions of what the Supreme Court has said about obscenity, but they totally hogtie the state prosecutor.
Look, you talk about prurient interest, but you can turn your television set on in the afternoon, see a soap opera, and it's not Deep Throat, but they're doing things in a highly suggestive way at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
I haven't seen the programs. I understand that they're on, which raises another point. Those programs may very well appeal to the prurient interest. They may even lack serious value, but they do not have the other essential part of obscenity. That is, they do not show patently offensive, hardcore sexual conduct. You can appeal to people's prurient interest from now to the time when the cows come home, and you will not have violated any obscenity statutes. You can have the most unserious works available, and so long as they do not have the patently offensive conduct, they're not obscene. Therefore, the producer, the maker, the writer He knows what risk he's taking when he gets involved in this. And if he's not willing to pay the fiddler, he better not dance.
Okay, there's a good example. The Joy of Sex, which has sold hundreds and hundreds of thousands of copies. You can call it a sex manual, call it what you want. It's a dirty book. The folks in here are doing all the things that they're doing in Deep Throat. It fulfills all the criteria.
Well, I'll have to take your word for that.
Don't you think?
I haven't read it, so I don't know.
Have a look.
Well, I didn't even know it was illustrated. I don't know. I wouldn't want to make a judgment on that without without studying it more carefully, of course. But there again, it can have the patently offensive conduct and not appeal to a prurient interest. Or it can have the patently offensive conduct, appeal to a prurient interest, and have serious value, and still be not obscene.
Look, we can argue all night about what's obscene and what is prurient interest. The fact is that the war against pornography has been lost, right?
No, I'm not concede that at all. In fact, well, the first point that I'd like to make is that pornography is not against the law, but obscenity is. Is the war against obscenity lost? No. In fact, I think that the signs that I see around the United States is that the opposite is true. I think effective statutes, for instance, would reduce by 50 or 60%, just almost overnight, the amount of material that was on the market. I think 2 or 3 significant prosecutions in the country would cut it down again. In other words, what I'm saying is that I honestly believe, and maybe a little bit optimistically, but I don't think unrealistically optimistically, that within a period of a year or a year and a half, obscenity could become, again, an underground enterprise by a few people that could be effectively controlled by the normal law enforcement techniques.
This week, a jury in Cincinnati was unable to reach a verdict in the Larry Flynt obscenity trial. The jury will continue deliberations tomorrow.